I'm just going to ask you just very briefly, really you get two minutes tops to do this. What have you learned about using clickers? Either what you do yourself or something that you've seen this morning that you think is a really key tip to using clickers well. I am Siara Isaac, and I work at the University of Lyon 1 in a service called ICAP, which is Innovation, Conception et Accompagnement pour la Pédagogie. We are the largest teaching support service in France. We are one out of 6 services that explicitly support pedagogical development in France. So that's 6 out of 150 higher education institutions that have a dedicated service. And I have been there for 3.5 years, and I have learned a huge amount during that time. I want to be very direct with you about this session. We're going to do a brief outline. Then this is up to you. Then this session really involves you working together as experts, providing feedback and interaction to each other about how you would deal with with 3 particular situations that I have identified as representative of recurrent situations that we've been encountering, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. But so you're looking at me now, but this is a very short-term thing. So the idea of this session is that this is a clicker, and it's a fabulous tool, but it's not going to solve all of your problems. In fact, it is going to cause some new problems, it's going to solve some other problems, and that we really need to stay focused on what's happening for the students. How is this technology actually having a positive impact or not on student learning? And so I'd like you just quickly, again, I'm giving you 2 minutes to do this, to introduce yourself to a neighbor or 2 neighbors and choose out of what you wrote down earlier, just one strategy that you have to share with your neighbor. In order to give us something concrete on which to build today, I've selected 3 case studies. A colleague, Victoria, who has a problem with her students being excessively passive, Eric, who wants to change the format of his tutorial, and Dominique, who has a continuing education course. So in a moment, I'll give you a little bit more details on the studies. But Victoria has the impression that her students are having difficulty following her class, but she's not getting a lot of feedback from them. They're not asking a lot of questions. So she used clickers during her last class, and that went well, but they answered, but that was about it. Can she now take their participation to the next level? So we've got level 1 clicker use. How can she now move to something that's more useful for learning?
Can we ask what sort of thing was she teaching?
She's teaching material science. Eric is teaching a tutorial in food science. And the way this tutorial has traditionally been run is that each computer has a series of exercises. It's in a computer lab, and each student has a series of exercises on the computer in front of them to run through. So students want to get finished quickly, and they're looking on getting the correct answer, finishing the activity so that they can get out of the lab. And Dominique, who I mentioned this morning, is teaching a continuing professional development course in dentistry, where she has some passive participants who are just simply there to complete their 18 hours of required training for the year, and other colleagues who are resenting being students and are resenting being put in a passive posture. So these are these 3 different studies. Which of these situations is most like your own experience? Which one of these is either a teaching situation that is similar to what you find yourself in or have found yourself in? All right, so particularly Victoria's passive students and a little bit with the other situations. Great, now I'd like to know which case study you'd like to work on. I'm suggesting that you may not necessarily want to work on the study that is most similar to your own experience, that often coming at a problem from a different angle, looking at something, a different set of problems, may help you see your own context a little bit better. So which situation appeals most to you? So we're at 21, 25, and we're coming back up to 30. All right. Great. So Dominique's continuing education course and a little bit of Eric and Victoria. Okay, so what I suggest then is that you're going to have to move. I know this is an outrageous session. So those of you who are interested in working on Dominique's continuing education course, you need to be sitting at one of these 4 tables. If you are interested in Vittoria's passive students, you need to be in these front 2 tables, and Eric's tutorial are the 2 tables back there. So Dominique is on this side, Vittoria's at the front, and Eric's back there. The first thing I'd like you to do is just take a moment individually to pass a piece of paper around to read the situation and to start to reflect on some of the possible causes. What has created this situation? And what sort of improvements, so this is some possible causes and some objectives that you have for, if we start using clickers, what improvements could we see with respect to student learning? Not all of these suggestions have to be simultaneously feasible. Not all of your suggestions of the possible causes need to be simultaneously possible. I'd like you to think about, concentrate on those first 2 sections. What are the possible causes? What has set up the situation that is suboptimal for learning? And what would you like to see in the situation to improve learning? Again, not all your suggestions have to be simultaneously feasible, but now to start your discussion, what are the causes? What has created this situation? Look at one of these 3 areas, either about formulating questions, about the logistics of how you manage the poll, or about how to respond to results. Identify one of these areas that you think is going to be really useful for your situation and come up with some really concrete suggestions. Again, they don't all have to be simultaneously feasible, but for how, given the situation that you've identified, those constraints, what should I do in my clicker use to promote effective learning? What are you going to take out of this? So I'd like you just to think about the discussions that you've had, about the concrete strategies that you've come up with, about perhaps how you formulated the goals for using clickers, and think about some ideas that you're going to apply to your own context. What out of this is relevant for you back in your own context? I'd like, though, to hear a little bit from you about what you're taking away. What are you taking out of this discussion back to your own context? What have you written down in the last 2 minutes that you're taking back to your own context? Yeah.
I've actually written down some notes that from effectively the blank sheet you supplied in terms of a way of approaching how to use clickers, the discipline of thinking what are the problems, what are the causes, what are the goals, and how can I specifically address those?
Great.
The method for structuring their use.
Okay.
So thank you.
Great.
I think we've noticed that we could allow them to be used in like staff meetings so that it engages staff as much as it does pupils, so that we're not just feeling that if you're sitting in a meeting and the teachers are talking at you and you're kind of missing out. It allows people to literally vote or add to the discussion without being identified as sticking a hand up or saying, oh, exactly in this situation as well, that like a lot of people still won't stand up and speak and put their own input straight back into it, even though it's like adults.
Yeah, great.
I think it's just reminded me of, which I know you can do, but I don't know if I've ever done it really, where you can not have your answers ready, get the group to come up with kind of answers to start with that you then poll on, so that when you don't really know what the answer from your group is going to be, you get them to create the answer options first, so that you really are catering to them and not just your preconceived ideas.
Great. Okay, so really staying connected with your group and what they're coming up with at that moment.
Yeah.
We've kind of been talking about something which we think is actually a slight negative in all of this, which is that if you are heavily integrating EVS use within your lectures, there's almost a sort of unwritten rule that that's the means by which students feel that they can interact with you, and so that might actually reduce spontaneous questions from students, and also partly you're not just there to educate students, you're there to help with their kind of social development, social skills and that kind of thing. And if you have a scenario in which there's sort of an unwritten rule that that's the main or the preferred way of communicating with students and vice versa, I think sometimes you need someone who's brave enough to stand up in a group, ask a question, to kind of challenge the lecturer, for the lecturer to challenge them back. And I think perhaps over-reliance on EVS can actually kind of reduce those spontaneous interactions that you might have with students. A lot of interesting stuff that I've done hasn't been based on what I know when I go into the session, it's been based on stuff that I've been asked, which then kind of triggers some kind of discussion and other people join in and so on. So that's my only sort of concern in terms of what we've been talking about today, that we can kind of get rid of some of that spontaneity and kind of makes it a bit formulaic. In terms
And that you need to keep on choosing your tools wisely. So I've asked, I think, 2 questions here. And the rest of the time, that because the technology is available doesn't mean that I have to, each time I'm looking for responses or interactivity, go to that, if that's the context that you set up. So again, thinking really clear about what your goals are, and how are you going to use the technology that fits for that, so that it doesn't become the only form of interaction in your classroom. Absolutely.
I remember this morning Dr. Kasperson said the opposite, that students do not speak, they don't even raise hands. But as soon as you start using the voting system, then it makes things better, and people start talking and discussing and raising their hands. So that's what I take home.